The only team that was really beat any other ranked team was Louisville. So if you look at it, which this is horrible to say, but and I know people are like, well, we know the ACC is horrible, and yeah, we know, but let's talk about it statistically. I've got down Clemson beat three ranked teams in the AP or the USA Today poll. Uh, Louisville beat one, and no one else. And the funny thing is, Louisville actually beat Wake Forest when they were ranked. So it's kind of like, I feel like it's just kind of cheating, you know. But really, if you look at it, I mean, technically, I would say probably Clemson, the only team to even beat any teams that were worth even talking about. But Louisville, again, had a good turnaround year. The problem that they really had was that they could score a lot, they could put up a lot of yards, but they also gave up a lot of points and a lot of yards as well. I'm looking here, 430 points for, 434 points against. Now, if your points against are more than your points for, that's not a good thing. Because on the other end, look at Clemson. 659 points for and 203 points against. So, I mean, domination is, and that's overall. So that's not just the ACC. We go to just the ACC, and it's still just as lopsided. Right. But Louisville did good at home, had a 2-3 record away. But we wanted to not only look at kind of their records and their stats, but also look at what we think they're going to do next year and kind of preview them a little bit. One thing that I've told you plenty of times last year, is it all starts and ends with the quarterback position. And they bring back Mikael Cunningham, who is a pretty good threat as far as running and passing the ball. He's nowhere near anything that Clemson would be used to having, but that's because I believe Clemson is, spoiled in the quarterback world for sure right now. But they do have reigning ACC Coach of the Year, Scott Satterfield. So I think, especially when spring training or spring camp has been cut short, the fact that there's not a lot of coaching turnover, and the fact that they have the reigning ACC Coach of the Year is good for Louisville.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I kind of echo a lot of the sentiments that you have. Last season they were 7-5, and then they went 8-5 when they beat Mississippi State Music City Bowl. Scott Satterfield, I really think is that coach that's going to kind of get them back to where they were a few years back with Lamar Jackson. I think he's a really good coach. I mean, goodness gracious, they went from 2-10 last year to 8-5, I think it was. That's a huge jump. And they kind of, they delve into the transfer market a good bit to kind of plug some of those holes. I'm assuming the transfers and the JUCOs and that kind of thing. I'm assuming they'll continue to do that. But like you said, Mikael Cunningham is coming back at their quarterback position, dual threat guy. Last year, I got some stats here. He was 111 for 178 with over 2,000 yards, 22 touchdowns and 5 interceptions. That's a pretty good ratio there. He also added 122 rushes for 482 yards and 6 touchdowns. So he's definitely got the dual threat capability. And then they've got decent playmakers. On the outside, they have Tutu Atwell. He's their leading returning receiver. You may hear, I don't know if you'll hear him later on today, when we talk about some of our top players list or not. He's got incredible speed. He's 5'9", 153 pounds. He ought to have incredible speed, right? He's one of those short area, quick twitch kind of guys. And he had almost 70 receptions for 1,272 yards, 12 touchdowns last year. So, the cover's not bare there. I think the kind of thing will be, can they improve their defense? They were ranked 102nd in overall defense, as you were kind of showing some of their numbers. Is not good. 102nd in defense, 79 in passing yards allowed, and 112th in rushing yards allowed. Gave up over 200 yards a game rushing. So it's just not going to get it done. It's not going to get it done in any conference, not even the ACC. And again, they did better in the ACC, obviously, but it's just they've got to improve on that number if they really want to take the next step. And it's going to kind of be interesting to see if, Mikael Cunningham can be protected. They lost one of their best players, and Mekhi Becton, I believe, is the offensive tackle that went pro, declared early. So I'm not sure who's all returning for them on their offensive line. I try to do a little research there because you know how I am about the offensive line, but it's just hard to find. I think all those positions are going to be up for grabs. The new coaches and things like that. I think they're just going to kind of say, hey, let's see what you got. And I'm sure that's going to happen at several schools that, got some different coaches. There were several teams in the ACC that you'll kind of find out today that kind of added some new coaches. So they also have Javian Hawkins returning at running back. He had a decent season last year. He had over 1,500 yards, 9 touchdowns. In one game against Syracuse, he had 23 rushes for 233 yards. Now, that's a heck of a game. Okay, so a lot of people want to talk about how he came on at the end of last year. I looked at his stats. I thought he did pretty solid overall, to be honest with you. And they kick off the season in ACC play. They are on the road at NC State on a Thursday night, so that's kind of a heck of a way to start the season. It's going to be that's a big game. Of course, any conference game is a big game. We know that, but on a Thursday night, away, that's kind of a big deal. Really get you ahead in the ACC Atlantic and get you behind in a hurry. So they're out of conference games. I noticed they're Murray State, Western Kentucky, Notre Dame, and Kentucky, of course, at the end of the year, their rivalry game. So they have a decent out of conference schedule. Notre Dame's technically out of conference, so we are going to consider them OOC game. But it's going to be interesting to see what Louisville does. I think they're definitely the second team in the ACC Atlantic. I don't really think there's anybody else, past Clemson. But if there was anybody that can make some noise, I think Louisville's that team.
I like that you said that they're the second team because that's what I put down as well. I could see this team winning 8 games again because of what they're returning. And they also didn't do too bad in the recruiting efforts. They got another linebacker, an offensive lineman, and a wide receiver to kind of fill in some gaps. They're really kind of losing, though, up front. They lost Gigi Robinson to graduation, who was one of their best pass rushers. And as you mentioned before, Minky Becton and Taylor Haycraft, both their tackles. So both their starting tackles are gone, which is always a concern. Because you at least, like Clemson, at least they return one, and the backup goes over to the right side, who is a great backup. So Clemson kind of shored up their tackles very quickly. And based off last year, I think we'll do fine. But Louisville, not so much. We don't really know what they're going to get on the offensive line, especially the edge of the offensive line. You go up against a team who has amazing defensive linemen like Clemson will have, and it's going to cause a lot of problems. In Louisville, that's one thing that they gave Clemson a good fight at the beginning, but they couldn't hold on. Yeah. And, I also looked, too, I thought this was interesting as I kept looking into this team. I think that they'll be, like going back to the offensive line, I think they'll be good unless, if you start seeing at the beginning of the season a bunch of sacks. If you start seeing a bunch of sacks at the beginning of the season, this team could be only a 5-win team. So to me, it's you got to protect that quarterback in Cunningham. He's got an extra year underneath him, and I think he is poised to do well. And again, like you said, they have Atwell. They have both their really good running backs, which is Javian Hawkins and Hassan Hall, who's really a running back and a kind of a kickoff punt returner type guy. Mm-hmm. Another thing I put in here was away games before November. So September, October away games. On average, you're going to get 3 away games. Okay, now most teams are going to play 5 total away games because there's going to be about 2, cupcake schools, usually what we see. And some of the worst schedules, you're going to get 6 away games. And even worse case scenarios, if you get a ton of away games, like say in November only, and we do have a team, I believe, we'll kind of go down the list, but a team that has a ton of almost only one home game in November, and so we'll talk about that later. But Louisville has got Clemson, Syracuse, and BC as away games before November. And we'll have to talk about Syracuse and BC as we continue. I think that they can at least split Syracuse BC. I think they can beat a Syracuse team. I don't think they can beat Clemson this year. But I do believe that their schedule is pretty good in the sense that they can probably win 8 more games, back to back and have a good showing. So that's my thought on Louisville. I do believe, as Alan said, it more than likely could be Clemson 1, Louisville 2 when everything shakes out at the end of the season, as far as the Atlantic Division.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that for sure. And some of those games you're talking about at the end of the year, that kind of matters. Where these games fall in the end of the year. Look, I'm not going to sit here and say they can't beat Clemson, okay? Last year, I thought North Carolina had no chance, and we saw how that one went, okay? So, you get, Pittsburgh, we thought, 3 years ago or whatever it was, they didn't have a chance, and see what happened at the Valley, before we went on to win the national championship. It's crazy. It's absolutely crazy. You can be beaten on any given night. people want to talk about Coach Swinney, how it's all lip service, how it's all coach speak when he talks about taking it one game at a time. I think he's being true when he says those words because he understands that this kind of thing can happen, and it seems to happen every year. Not necessarily, we don't always get that loss, but there's always that team that plays us close, and of course sometimes we do end up with a loss like Pittsburgh.